right, again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining NCDEQ for our Volkswagen Settlement Level 2 Multi-Unit Dwellings Program webinar. I'm Stephen Rice, an environmental specialist for the Division of Air Quality and the Level 2 Program Manager, and I'm joined by additional DAQ staff who manage other aspects of the Volkswagen Settlement. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. All attendees will be muted during today's webinar. Questions can be submitted in the Q&A box and will be addressed during the question and answers time if not covered in today's presentation. The raise hand feature will be disabled until the question and answer time and will only be considered for those who've called into the webinar by phone. For those who are calling in, pressing *3 will raise your hand and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. All other attendees must use the Q&A box to submit their questions and send questions to the general Q&A and not directly to specific panelists. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the DAQ Volkswagen website at a later date. We have 2 hours scheduled to discuss the program and the application process, but if we complete everything and answer all questions with time to spare, we will have the option to adjourn early. If we're not able to answer all questions by the end of our time, we will let you know how to get your questions to us. When today's presentation becomes available on the DAQ Level 2 website, be aware that links found in the slides will only be active when used in presentation mode. So today's webinar will cover an overview of the Level 2 Multi-Unit Dwellings Program and its application process, information on when and how to submit your application, information on what happens to your application once it is submitted, information on where to find answers after today's webinar, and a time for questions and answers. I would like to remind attendees today that this is not a public forum for comments on the implementation of the Volkswagen Settlement. The RFP for the Level 2 Multi-Unit Dwellings Program was released on May 2nd. The Level 2 program overview found in the RFP states that NCDEQ is allocating the full 15% allowed in the Volkswagen State Trust Agreement for Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV, infrastructure projects outlined in the NC Mitigation Plan. NCDEQ will give 70% of the Phase 2 ZEV infrastructure allocated funds to DC fast charging projects and 30% to Level 2 charging projects. This program has just about $500,000 available for funding of new accessible Level 2 charging stations. The primary goal is to increase the use of ZEVs in place of gas-powered cars to mitigate nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and greenhouse gas emissions in the state. To achieve that goal, the program will emphasize adding new ZEV charging infrastructure in underserved areas, extending the existing light-duty ZEV infrastructure across the state, encourage interstate and intrastate ZEV usage at North Carolina's diverse geographic, historic, and tourist attractions, and highlight the environmental benefits of ZEVs. The application for the Multi-Unit Dwellings Program will be available in the Grant Management System, or the GMS, on June 13th, and those applications will be accepted and approved on a first-come, first-served basis until program funds have been exhausted. The Multi-Unit Dwellings Program will assist interested parties in applying for funds to install light-duty ZEV Level 2 charging infrastructure as described in the North Carolina Volkswagen Mitigation Plan. In Phase 1, multi-unit dwellings, or MUDs, were acceptable project types but did not have their own dedicated program. DEQ is happy to provide MUDs with their own Volkswagen funding source after getting feedback on how much charging is needed in these types of living environments. I will discuss changes that were made from phase 1 into phase 2 for this program throughout today's presentation. But something that hasn't changed that I want to mention right off the bat is that this is a reimbursement program. Applicants must be willing and able to purchase and install level 2 charging equipment using their own funds. Also, just like in phase 1, applicants are limited to $25,000 in approved rebate vouchers at any given time. Something new in phase 2 is that the rebate vouchers for awarded projects will expire after 1 year from the date of an agreement being fully executed. The pandemic and supply chain issues made the original phase 1 timeframe of 180 days borderline impossible for most awardees, and we decided to learn from experience and double that time in phase 2. Here we see a table of all available funding for ZEV programs in phase 2. The multi-unit dwellings program is the third level 2 program to have its RFP released, and as I said earlier, has almost $500,000 devoted to project rebates. Regarding eligible applicant types, in short, property owners, management companies, and HOAs of multi-unit dwellings in North Carolina, such as apartment complexes and condominiums, are eligible to apply. Please note that this program does exclude individually owned townhouses, row houses, and mobile homes. Specific details on applicant eligibility are found in the Level 2 Multi-Unit Dwellings RFP, which is linked here and is available for review on the Level 2 webpage. The RFP identifies multi-unit dwellings with 10 or more units as eligible project locations. Ineligible project locations are locations at an individual single-family residence, individually owned townhouses, row houses, and mobile homes, and locations for employee or fleet-only charging. The type of property a project is on will determine the maximum percentage of total project cost reimbursement. If a MUD project offers public access, it can be reimbursed at $4,000 per port, or up to 80% of the project cost, whichever is less. Or if a MUD project does not offer public access, it can be reimbursed at $3,000 per port, or up to 60% of the project cost, again, whichever is less. So for example, let's say a project was to install publicly accessible chargers at an apartment complex's welcome center and consists of installing 4 level 2 charging ports. If all the quotes for the project totaled $22,000, then the 2 calculated rebate options would be $16,000 or $17,600. Since the program uses the lesser of the 2 calculated amounts, the maximum rebate offered would be $16,000 for this project. Please be aware that multiple project types cannot be incorporated into a single application, and that publicly accessible means being available to the public for an annual average of 12 hours per day without restriction. For publicly accessible projects, an applicant will need to attach proof of this to your application or attest to this requirement in the project details of the application. Like all Volkswagen programs, there are a number of project and site requirements that should be considered before you apply for funding. For example, each Level 2 multi-unit dwellings project must have a minimum of 2 charging ports. Each installed Level 2 charging station must connect to a network by wired Ethernet, Wi-Fi, or cellular connection. And each charger must be maintained and operated for a minimum of 5 years from the date of project completion. The full list of project requirements is found in the MUD RFP. All MUD site requirements from Phase 1 have carried over to Phase 2, but there are a few requirements that are new to Phase 2. A new requirement is providing an annual average of 12 hours per day without restriction for publicly accessible projects. Before we required 12 hours standard, and now it is an annual average of 12 hours. Two continued requirements are that if the project property is not owned by the applicant must provide a signed letter from the landowner indicating approval for the project, and that a project must include at least one designated and clearly marked EV parking space per charger port. The full list of site requirements is also outlined in the RFP. A new aspect of this Phase 2 program is a focus on charger accessibility. This is outlined in the site requirements and helps ensure that projects must make every effort to be ADA compliant and follow all applicable laws, ordinances, regulations, and standards. Additional reference material regarding accessibility for public charging stations can be found on the Plugin NC webpage, which is linked in the slide and also in the RFP. The Volkswagen State Mitigation Trust Agreement states that trust funds may be used on costs necessary for and directly connected to the acquisition, installation, operation, and maintenance of new light-duty ZEV supply equipment. The following items on this slide are all considered eligible expenditures, and this list, plus a list of ineligible expenditures, are both found in the multi-unit dwellings RFP. So now that we've covered the background and requirements of the MUD program, let's transition into the process of submitting an application. Thankfully, not much has changed in Phase 2 from Phase 1, but we'll still cover the process from beginning to end, starting with the fact that NCDEQ will still only accept applications submitted through the NCDEQ grant management system. Prior to using the GMS, applicants must obtain an NCID and then complete and submit the online Enterprise Business Services external request application. This request application is an updated version of the GMS access authorization forms that were used in Phase 1 and makes the process of gaining access to the GMS easier than before. When you complete the request application, you should also complete and email the State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form to the email address found in this slide. To request access to the DAQ Grants Management System, as stated before, you will first need an NCID. In this slide, we have provided links for NCID registration, as well as the How to Create an NCID guide. And I will walk through the steps of creating an NCID in a few upcoming slides. Acceptable NCID formats. NCIDs must be in the following format, or your request for access to the GMS will be denied. The format is your first name or initial, followed by an optional middle initial, and then followed by your last name and a number if that combination of names is already used in the GMS. So some example usernames, if we're going based off of someone, Wile E. Coyote, just for fun, some examples for NCID are listed below. There are 4 potential combinations that would be considered acceptable. And again, you could see that if Wile E. Coyote was already used, Wile E. Coyote 2, if available, would be an acceptable NCID. We definitely want to emphasize that NCIDs must not be a company or organization name. NCIDs are supposed to be associated with one specific individual. So when you make your NCID, please use the following format. Here we see some other important NCID information. If you already have an individual or government NCID, there is no need to create a brand new NCID. If you have any other EBS or SAP system account, you'll still need an NCID. There is space on the Access application request for you to put your current EBS or SAP account information. Also, once you have completed an NCID request, you will receive a new NCID user registration email from ncid.notifications@nc.gov. You must click the link in that email and follow the instructions to complete the registration of your NCID before submitting the external request application. So to begin the process of creating an NCID for GMS Access, you will need to go to ncid.nc.gov and click the register link, which is highlighted on this slide. You'll be taken to the new user registration page, where you'll click the individual NCID option. And now you'll enter in information into the following text fields. When the required information is all entered, click the Continue button. Again, a reminder that NCIDs must be in a particular format or your request for GMS Access will be denied. Again, using first name, middle initial, and last name, and again, using a number in the event that the NCID you want is already taken in the system. Again, just a reminder that you should not use your company or organization name as your NCID. So now the system needs to verify your information after you submitted it on that previous NCID registration page. A code was sent to the email address which you provided, and you'll need to enter that code in the following field. Here is an example of a verification email containing the 6-digit code, which needs to be entered into the field from the previous slide. And after entering that code and clicking Check Code, you'll receive a confirmation that your information has been verified. Click Continue to see the remaining setup steps. At this stage, you will need to create security questions and answers to activate your NCID account. Click the Continue button to complete this step. Here you see that there are 5 security questions which you'll need to configure for your account. Once these questions are selected and the answers are provided, click Save Answers. And this completes the NCID creation process. If you experience issues with your NCID and or your NCID password, you'll need to go to the ncid.nc.gov website to retrieve your username, to retrieve your password, or to unlock your account. There is a Need Help link on that page for other NCID problems or questions as well. So you must read and follow all the directions on the next slides to request access to the DAQ Grants Management System, and then be approved before you can log into the system. And for clarification, approved means that you received a Welcome to the DAQ Enterprise Business System portal email. Only after that email will you be able to log in to the GMS. So in a previous slide, I mentioned that the EBS external request application is an updated version of the GMS Access Authorization form from phase 1. When you complete the request application, the external request application, you should also complete and email the State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form to daq.nc_VWgrants@ncdenr.gov. That email address is found here on this slide. Please note that, just like in phase 1, an organization can have up to 3 authorized users in the GMS at one time, and that once the authorization is processed, you will receive an email from NCDOT IT SAP Support Services. So once all required forms are received to process your GMS access request, it could take a week or longer to complete and to gain access to the GMS. Please do not wait until the week before this application opens to request access. At that point, there is no guarantee that you'll have access when the application opens. We really encourage you to submit the documentation for GMS access as soon as possible. Not only are you in a line behind other people that are gaining access for this multi-unit dwellings program, but all other Volkswagen programs and all other programs offered by other agencies that happen to be using the grants management system. So we really can't stress enough, please complete and submit this paperwork as soon as you can. Again, part of this paperwork is the W-9 form. This form allows DAQ to set up an organization with new GMS users in the North Carolina accounting system in order to receive reimbursement payments. For all new GMS users, we encourage you to submit the EBS application and the W-9 form again as soon as possible. We encourage you to fill out all documents electronically versus by hand. And then our third-party access authorization information. In cases where an applicant has a third party submitting applications and documentation on their behalf, the following procedures must be followed. The applicant must provide in writing that they are authorizing this third party to submit applications and other information, and the third party will need to obtain their own NCID and submit an access authorization request application with the applicant's organization address information and the third party's phone number and email address. And you should enter, the third party should enter contractor in the comments field of the request application. Also, the letter or email that is received from the applying organization, that should be sent along with the W-9 to the DAQ.NC_VW grants email address. Make sure you include that approval letter or email. So at this point in the presentation, you may be feeling a bit overwhelmed with all of the procedures and the information needed just to apply. Well, especially if this is your first time applying for Volkswagen funding, you're definitely not the only person feeling this way. To help make sure that all application requirements are being met, we have created an application checklist which covers general requirements plus requirements specifically for this Level 2 program. The link to the checklist is found in the slide as well as on the DAQ Volkswagen website. All documentation must be included when submitting an application for that application to be reviewed. A unique requirement for the MUD program is the inclusion of an applicant's rules, regulations, or bylaws allowing the use of EV charging station, of the charging station or stations by all residents in the given complex. This ensures that a Level 2 charging project is allowed on the property and is available to all residents. So now we've come to the grants management system overview and demo, where I will tell you about how to use the GMS, tell you about its tutorials, and how to submit an application. This slide has links to our GMS portal, GMS user guides, and a sample application found on the MUD program webpage. Unfortunately, our test GMS system is down at the moment, but I'm going to log in to our production GMS and walk through the steps of submitting an application up to the point where one would actually click the submit button. And from that point, we will cover the remaining process using one of the GMS tutorials. So on this slide, we have links to the GMS information on the left, but on the right is a screenshot of the home page for the grants management system. To log into the system, you're going to need that NCID and password that we talked about before. So I have here, again, that Enterprise Business Services, the GMS login page. I have my NCID username and password, and I'm going to log in to the grants management system. So once you're in the system, you'll see a variety of panels on the home page, including portals for frequently asked questions and GMS tutorials. You can get to the application. In order to get to the application, you're going to want to click the Division of Air Quality Grants panel, found here in the top left. What that's going to do is open up a new window, and this will show you your account home page. The layout of your account will be a bit different than mine, but ultimately there will be a number of search options for you where the ability to create a new application is found. Let's go through the process of applying for a Level 2 multi-unit dwellings rebate by clicking the Create New Application link. So down here we have a list of options related to an application. We want to find right toward the top the Create New Application link. So by clicking Search button found here, you can see that an account is set up to reference the NCDEQ DEQ grants options. We won't see the Level 2 charge option for multi-unit dwellings, the link, until the application opens on June 13th. But the MUD application is a clone of the Public Access Program's application, so I will click that link for now to show you what the application will look like. When you're applying, though, make sure you click the link specifically for the Multi-Unit Dwellings Program. So again, right here, I'm going to click the link for Public Access Program, but as of June 13th, you will see a new entry here for the Multi-Unit Dwellings Program. Make sure when you're doing this for real, you click the link to that program. And right now, I'm going to need to select my organization. There we go. So for our demo purposes, I'm going to select North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. As you are applying, you will type in your organization, or you might also see that your organization is directly linked to your account, and you won't see this option come up. But just for me, since I don't have a business partner ID in the system, I needed to manually enter my organization. But now we're looking at the first page, or the first of 6 tabs of the application. In this first project tab, I'm going to enter my project's basic information, starting with the project title. So let's just do DEQ MUD Chargers. Then right below, you can see that there are drop-down fields for specifying other aspects of my project. I'm going to select the appropriate project details and move on to entering project location information. This first option for program type, you're going to not have any other options. You're going to remain in this ZEV infrastructure option. Equipment type, though, this is the first thing we're going to specifically select, and we're going to go to the bottom where it says multi-unit dwelling. Over here, we're going to select applicant type. Just again, for consistency, we'll select government. And for project type, we will make sure that these chargers are publicly accessible. Remember that the definition for publicly accessible is found in the RFP, and that's something that I would need to provide proof or attest to in the application. My project location, we'll just do something simple. Hopefully I'm able to remember acceptable latitude and longitude. And again, I'm selecting available 12 hours or longer. When this information is filled out, you can check to see if the page registers any errors. If you've left anything blank, it says that I have not, so I'm going to proceed to the next tab. I can click next or click the tab up here directly. And it allowed me to move on to the contact tab. This is where I'm going to enter the contact information for the project's authorized representative, project manager, and financial contact. While it's possible that one person can fill all three of these roles, in this sample project, we'll have 3 different individuals to enter. I will need to fill in these fields and then check for errors to make sure that everything is entered. And let's say, though, that I was going to act as both the authorized representative and the project manager. Instead of having to retype all this information, I can simply click copy from authorized representative, and all of a sudden it comes in here. Let's enter the following information for our financial contact. Again, if I wanted to check to make sure I don't have any errors, I can there. And again, I can click the next tab or click next down here. So now the third tab, charger details. This is where I will enter the requested information for any chargers being installed at the project location. The full list of requirements for a qualifying level 2 project are found in the RFP, but for this tab, please remember that a project in total requires a minimum of 2 ports and at least one designated and clearly marked EV parking space per port. Also, each charger must provide at least 6.6 kilowatts of charging power and have a minimum 5-year warranty for equipment and service. Now that I'm ready to enter my chargers, I'm going to click Add Charger and begin filling in the info fields. For multiple chargers, click Add Chargers as many times as necessary. So let's say in this project, I want 2 dual port chargers. I'll enter the manufacturer. For here, we'll just enter a generic manufacturer and model. But here, when you contact a vendor and get a quote, you're going to add that vendor specific name and model in this information. We'll make this a dual port charger, so 2 ports. I'm devoting 2 parking spaces. Through my research, I know that it can provide 7.2 kilowatts of charging capacity and that I have 5 years of warranty. Again, ChargeCo, same thing, level 2 charger. Another dual port charger, another 2 spaces, 7.2 and 5-year warranty. And we see that the page automatically totaled these different columns, and that helps applicants confirm that they've entered the appropriate amount of ports that they plan to have in their project. Again, you can click Add Charger to add as many individual chargers as necessary. I can click Check for completeness. You want to make sure that all of this information is filled in, or else the application is considered incomplete. And we're going to move on to our next tab. So in this funding tab, I'm going to need to complete a rebate calculation spreadsheet and then enter the total from that spreadsheet into the total field here. The link to the spreadsheet is found in the tab, and as well as the Volkswagen website, and also in slides from other presentations. There are many places that you can find this spreadsheet, but if you're going through the application and you find it easy just to click here, go ahead and click. We see that it asks if I want to open. Let's go ahead and do that. Make sure that we want to enable editing of the spreadsheet and enable various content. Okay, so let's start by seeing the worksheet instructions. We're being asked to fill in the blue spaces with your project information and check the box that corresponds to your project category. The potential rebate amounts will automatically calculate. And we are also being asked that upon completion of this worksheet, to save it and upload it as an attachment with your application in the DAQ grant management system. We see that our first blue field is for our organization name, Carolina Department of Mental Quality. Project title, let's be thorough. I see DEQ mud chargers. So I can enter that here. Total number of charging ports to be installed. We're going to reference this number with the charger details tab, and I know I put 4 in that tab, so I will enter 4 here. Insert total project cost. Let's say that all the quotes that I received for the chargers specifically and for the installation, for the electrical work, all the costs associated with this project that are found under the list of eligible expenditures. I want to have the documentation for that attached to the application, but also I want to know my total. Just to make it easy, let's say this project would cost $30,000. Below where I just entered the total project cost, we'll see entry where you're asked to insert the total of other rebates, incentives, subsidies. If you don't have any of these being factored into your project at the time of your application, you would leave this blank. If you had additional sources of funding that you were going to include, you would enter that amount here, and that would subtract from the total project cost. But in this example, we're just going to have 30,000, and below you see for the multi-unit dwelling program, we got the 2 options of public access and no public access. I designated this project as being publicly accessible, so I want to make sure that that option is selected. I see that it's a maximum of $4,000 per port, or the maximum percentage allowed, which was 80%. So I have 2 totals here. I have 16,000, which is the $4,000 times my 4 ports, or the 24,000, which is 80% of my total project cost. And the calculator is going to automatically select the lower of the 2, which is $16,000. That is how much would be the maximum amount allotted to me in the form of a rebate. and I'm going to enter $16,000 into the funding tab of my application. Before we leave this though, I want to scroll down past that calculated amount. If your project is going to compile multiple properties that are owned by this organization that's applying, in that first tab of your project information, you are only able to enter one address. Here, you would enter the additional addresses, or if you want all of the addresses for your project. So you don't have to worry about adding the additional locations on the application itself, but we do reference this part of the calculation worksheet, and if in your description we see that there will be multiple locations, we're going to reference this part of the spreadsheet and make sure that these other locations are here. If they're not, we'll return the application for you to add them. We want to make sure that we know of all the locations that you plan on installing chargers. So again, if I were done with this spreadsheet, the instructions made it clear that we need to save and in the future upload this as an attachment to the application. So again, I would just save as, and I could save it to my desktop for reference later. Want to make sure that we have a copy of this available to attach to the application. Again, I said that we would take that amount and enter it here, $16,000 as calculated in the worksheet, and I can move on to the next tab. So now that I'm in the project details tab, I'm instructed to describe information on project procurement, installation, activation, and commissioning, testing, and signage for my project. This is where I should note collaborations with interested utilities, local business, cities, counties, or other entities, as well as describe sustainable business models for the project. Essentially, you want to add all important information in this portion of the application. Please note that there is a limit of 3,000 characters in the text box. And there are examples of base submitted project details from the sample application found on the Multi-Unit Dwellings webpage. Just so for completeness, I'll enter this in, but again, you would want to include obviously a lot more information, as much information as you think would be important for the review process. And as I mentioned before, if you are designating your project as publicly accessible, this is one of the options, adding that statement, that testing to that fact that the charger will be accessible to the public for the annual average of 12 hours without any kind of interference. Entering that into the project details tab would count as proof. If we don't see that, and if we don't see other forms of proof to the public accessibility, we will return the application and ask for you to provide it. So some of the easiest way to do that up front is to include that statement here in the project details. So now the last tab of the application is for certification. You're going to check this box, and by doing that, you're certifying to the information found here. Things like the DEQ should be granted access to inspect the project. If it is awarded, we'll need that to complete a claim reimbursement. You're also certifying that records documenting the planning process will be maintained and also submitted when requested. So make sure to be thorough that you look at the information here before you check. And then the authorized representative for the project, their name should be found here, and the title can be entered here. Again, you can click check to make sure everything is complete. and then you would also be able to save and close or to click submit. And by clicking submit, you have taken the application from your work process and sent it to DAQ's work process for review. I mentioned before that this is the production version of the grants management system, so I don't want to click submit right now. But what I'm going to do is take us to the DAQ, the GMS training library, as if we have clicked the save and close. If I clicked save and close, I would get a confirmation window following the pressing of that button. The GMS would generate an application ID, which I would want to keep for my records, and it would also open or allow the applicant to add attachments, to browse their local computer, and to upload attachments to their application. And in the event that someone does click save and close, we're going to go to the GMS training library and look how we could edit an application after that was done. So again, we have links. I have links here to Portal FAQ and tutorials. The links are also found on your grants homepage. Since this is my account, I would have a different tutorial than the standard applicant, but here is what the tutorial would look like if you, as an applicant, clicked that tutorials library link. You'd see a variety of topics here on the left that should answer and cover most questions associated with the GMS and submitting an application. But again, just based on this demo, let's say we got to the point where we chose to save and close the application. In order to submit your application, you would need to go to the Edit Application Form link and follow part of these steps. So by clicking the Edit Application module, we'll see a list of steps that you can go through to successfully edit your application and ultimately lead you to submitting the application. Here we see a play button. This will give us a visual step-by-step representation of the edit application process. I'm going to go ahead and click that now. Now we see new pages opened, and it says that the simulation will guide us through the steps of editing a previously saved application. So click Save. Again, we see the list of options associated with an application. This would be on your GMS homepage. You're going to click the Edit Application Form link. The next page you see allows you to search for your specific application. Like I said before, once you click that Save and Close button, you'll have a page come up which gives you the GMS assigned application ID. You'll see in the tutorial that the application ID is entered. If you want to streamline that process a little bit, you can go ahead and click search right away. That also would allow you to reference your application. But for this example, you'll see the application ID being entered in the application ID text field. And after it's entered, you click search, and you'll see the link for your application. This is what you would want to click. Something that we've seen in other programs are people saving their application, and instead of coming back to edit it in order to change information or to submit that application, they go back to the original create application link. We definitely want to encourage you not to go through that process and create a bunch of partially completed applications. You should really be starting and editing and completing one single application. And again, to do that, if you need to come back to that application, you do it via the Edit Application Form process. So in the tutorial, you'll see that the link is clicked. And now it says that you can make any necessary changes to the application. So any of the information that was entered into any of the application tabs can be edited at this point. So you can go through that process, and if you're not quite done, you can click that save and close button again. And behind the window for the tutorial, you see that confirmation window I was talking about before. You'll get the message that your application has been saved, and after application ID, you'll have a number here. That's what you would enter to reference the application. Here you'd see that it starts, all applications start with a 1, have a string of zeros, and then a couple of digits. Again, this is your specific application ID. If I go back to the previous step, if you are going through this process and you know that you're completely done with your application, you can go to that certification tab and click submit at that point. So if you've saved an application, the only way that you can submit it is through the edit application form process. That's what we're seeing here. Otherwise, that submit button will be grayed out. You would only be able to view the application. Make sure when you're ready to submit, if you don't on your first attempt of filling out the application, that you go through the process of the edit application. And that completes the tutorial for edit application. That puts us closer to being able to submit the application. Again, you would be able to either save or submit your application in the edit application process. But again, we really encourage you, after you have access to the grants management system, even before you start your application, to go through these tutorials to get more familiar with the grants management system, to be more comfortable with the process. And then for the MUDS program on June 13th is when you will see the link for the program-specific application become visible to you, and you can start your application at that time. And before we move on to the back to that presentation, back to our slides, I do want to mention before that there are multiple ways to attach documentation to your application. So besides the save or submit confirmation page that we're viewing here in the grants home, let me go and show you that. You see the view application link. So if you've started and saved an application, you can click view application. You can enter in the application ID here, or you can click the search button. Both will reference your application. Once you click the link for your application, under view, you would not be able to submit your application, but you would be able to see all the attachments that you've added up to that point, as well as the ability to browse for files on your local computer and add additional attachments. So those confirmation pages that we saw before have the ability to add attachments, but you can also add attachments from your GMS homepage by clicking View Application and referencing your application this way. And again, there are links to the GMS, links to instructions and tutorials found on this slide, as well as the GMS manual. So while the tutorials are very thorough and cover the most common aspects of submitting an application and the most important features of the GMS, if for any reason you still have questions about using the GMS or submitting an application that aren't answered in the tutorials, you are able to contact us. We'll be able to help. But also that GMS manual link that you see in this slide, I'll go ahead and I'll click it now. gives a complete visual and written explanation and outline of the GMS for external users. I can't imagine there's a topic that we have not covered because we've developed this when we made the GMS, and we have added information after phase 1 and try to cover any type of deficiencies. But between the tutorials within the GMS and this external users guide, really all the questions that come with submitting an application, and if awarded, the following steps to completing your project and being reimbursed, all of it can be found using the DAQ GMS external users guide. All right, and I had mentioned through the demo process that certain aspects of your application could cause it to be returned back to the applicant or to be rejected. What you see on the slide is an example of a return letter that was used in phase 1. If your application is incomplete or needs editing after being submitted, you will receive an email from the GMS with a return letter attached, similar to what similar to this one, which will outline the work that needs to be done on your application. To make edits to your application, you will use the edit application process that we just explored. And in phase 1, again, the most common reason an application was returned was that an applicant did not submit proof or a statement in the project details tab which verified the public accessibility requirement. Definitely mentioned it a couple times, and I'll mention it again. If you are designating your project as publicly accessible, please make sure that you include proof of that or include the attestament in the application. So some tips and general things to know. Again, do not wait until the week of June 6th to request GMS access. We will be unable to guarantee that you have access to the application when it opens on June 13th. So you really are encouraged to submit any kind of registration information and to get an NCID as soon as possible. But a week out from when the application opens on the 13th, being June 6th, if you've waited to this point, it's very possible that you're not able to apply as early as you could if the documentation was turned in before that. So the very, very last day you should even consider trying to gain access to the GMS would be June 6th, but honestly, as soon as possible would be the best case scenario for getting GMS access. Also see here that your budget information should be as accurate as possible. Again, I mentioned including all of the quotes when you are submitting the application as attachments and factoring into the rebate amount. Try to have all of that financial information on hand and in one place. DEQ reserves the right to partially fund awarded projects. If we have started getting close to using all of the MUD program funds, or if there's another reason to partially fund a project, that is something that we will bring up with an applicant. We do not accept paper, scanned, emailed, or faxed applications in this or any of our programs. Do not sign any agreements with vendors or start work with until your agreement is fully executed with NCDEQ. We don't want to see that anything has begun until we send you a fully executed agreement, and an email saying that your project is eligible for an award is not the same as receiving an executed agreement. So we will be very clear on when you can begin your program, but please do not start any work, do not get invoiced officially for any aspect of your project until you receive that fully executed agreement. Just like in phase 1, there will be quarterly, annual, and final project reporting requirements for all awarded projects. The templates for these reports are found on the forms page of the DAQ Volkswagen website. DAQ staff will perform site visits at all stations, at all sites, to verify the installation and operation of the charging station prior to approval of any reimbursement claim. DAQ staff must be granted access to the charging site. And in closing, the Level 2 multi-unit dwellings request for proposals was released back on May 2nd. The application for this program will open in the GMS on June 13th, and applications will be accepted and approved on a first-come, first-served basis until all funds have been exhausted. This is a reimbursement program. Applicants must be willing and able to purchase and install Level 2 charging equipment using their own funds. Applicants are limited to $25,000 in approved rebate vouchers at any time, and rebate vouchers for awarded projects will expire after 1 year from the date that an agreement is fully executed. Here we can see a timeline for our MUD program. Please note that after June 13th, DAQ will review the applications on a week-to-week basis, and in phase 1, we typically would announce awarded projects in groups of 15. We'll see if that is consistent, but we will not announce awards on a one-by-one basis. If there are any changes to this process or to the schedule, we will provide an update on the Level 2 MUD website. And speaking of the Level 2 MUD website, here is the direct link. The website has the RFP and provides access to all the information that we covered today. If you have any questions going forward, you can search the website, or you can send a question by email to the DAQ NC_VW grants email address. So if you are not currently on our mailing list and would like to receive email updates about the Volkswagen program, please send an email with the word subscribe in the subject line to the NCVW grants email address. There are several resources and partners that worked with both the DAQ and applicants in phase 1 that you can utilize also in phase 2. Contact information for this list is available on the MUD program website. We definitely recommend reaching out to anyone on this list and other public resources as you try to come up with your specific project details. And here are your Volkswagen program contacts. Again, I'm Stephen Rice. I'm the Level 2 Program Manager. We have Brian Phillips, who is the Mobile Sources Compliance Branch Supervisor, and we have Robin Barrows, our Allied Program Supervisor, who's helped us very much with our Volkswagen outreach. So that concludes the informational part of today's webinar, and now we will address questions that have been collected in the Q&A box. Our host will now attempt to enable the raise hand feature for those who called into the webinar by phone. Again, pressing *3 will raise your hand, and pressing *3 following will lower your hand. All other attendees must use that Q&A box to submit their questions. I would like to remind attendees that this is not an opportunity to comment on the implementation of the Volkswagen settlement, and that questions will need to pertain to the Level 2 MUD program. So with that being said, Volkswagen team, I'm ready for any of our questions.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a few questions in the Q&A box right now that we'll go through. I'll just remind folks one more time that if you have any questions, just post it into the chat and we will answer it for you as they come in. So the first question is a statement, actually, from Kayla, who says it's important to note that in addition to the NCID, if you are submitting an application on behalf of another entity, you need to get that approval early as well. Stephen, do you have anything to kind of add about that process?
Yeah, Kayla, you're 100% correct. It is important that you I don't want to tell people how to go about organizing their project, but in the event that you are not part of the organization that's applying but want to be involved, again, the eligible applicants are listed in the RFP, and if you fall outside the scope of an applicant, you can still be part of a project via the third party applicant process. So part of that process, is getting your own NCID, which Kayla mentioned, but is also getting approval for your involvement and for the right to submit an application and other documentation on behalf of the organization that's applying. That could be in the form of an email, that could be in the form of an official letter, but again, seeing that there are specific guidelines to who can formally apply if you fall outside of the entities listed in the RFP, you can still work along with an HOA or within a property management group and get access to the GMS as a third party for that organization. And definitely the best thing to do is to start that process early, to get that approval early, so that there's no issues either with getting into the GMS and being associated with this other organization.
Thanks. Audrey asks, is there a list of all attachments needed in the application?
Yes, there is a checklist. What I can do here, because we've talked about it so much, is our multi-unit dwelling program webpage. The link to that is in the presentation, but we also have it up here. We have information that was covered today. But if we scroll down to the bottom, under application, we have links to the spreadsheet, we have links to an attachment checklist, and we have links to an application checklist. So specific attachments can be found here. If we scroll down to our MUD rebate program, you'll see that this information would be required for an application. So you want to make sure that you have that attached to the application when you submit it. And the application checklist is very similar, a lot of overlap between the two lists, but again, covers more parts of the application itself that would be required, like the GPS coordinates and the charging equipment information. So these are not attachments, but these are considered required aspects of an application. So you would need to know this information beforehand, before you start filling in and before you submit that application. But both of these checklists, as you saw, were available on the multi-unit dwelling webpage.
Great. Jean says, thank you for this webinar. The links to the level 2 rebate calculator on the NCDEQ website aren't working. She asks, is there another way to access the worksheet? And I checked and it seemed to be working for me there. I'll certainly take another look at it this afternoon and see if there's any changes that I need to make sure that works. But Stephen, is there another way to access the worksheet?
Well, we'll definitely review the links. I'll just say it is possible that one that you've happened to find as referencing an older version that maybe no longer, the file itself is no longer there. And I say it's possible because we tried to put the hyperlink to the spreadsheet in a variety of places. We really want to, kind of focus in on, that's part of our outreach, is to not just have it in one spot and make it hard to find. We want to make it very accessible. But that doesn't excuse one of our links not working. We'll definitely check. And again, I'm on that MUD program website, still under the application drop down menu. And if I click the download level 2 application spreadsheet, I can go ahead and try to open it here. And it does let me open the spreadsheet. It does look like this is part of the application. That's the application link, so that's kind of a demo link. And let me close this too, because that might be causing a problem.
Steven, this is Robin. Do we
Okay.
have preferred browsers for to use this on? Perhaps.
For our website, we do not have preferred browsers. But I know for the grants management system, we were told the preferred browser is Chrome or Firefox. I don't believe they're continuing support for Internet Explorer or for the other Windows browser. Edge, yeah, you could tell that Edge does not get used much from me, but
yeah, Stephen, I think the link on that website is the wrong it's going to the wrong spreadsheet. It's going to the spreadsheet for the state agency program, so we'll get that fixed shortly.
Okay, if we need to we'll review that link. We'll review the links to all.
They can go to the public accessible program page and download the correct spreadsheet for the time being.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
There are no other questions in the chat right now, so I'll just do another call for please send your questions, type them into the Q&A box. We can wait a couple of minutes to make sure we answer everybody's questions. And here comes one. Deborah asks, please confirm that eligible MUDs can include individually owned condos and townhomes, shared walls, as long as chargers are on land owned by the HOA and not individual homeowners.
Without getting more information on the project details that you have, I believe you're correct in that. Again, the goal of these chargers is to be accessible to anyone living, in a multi-unit dwelling, whether that's the site is on the welcome center or a general parking lot. That would be acceptable. We are trying to, through the RFP, eliminate any chance of a charger being installed where only a select group of people can use it. So it wouldn't be on an individual's property. But as long as that charger is installed at a location that would be available to all members of the multi-unit dwelling, that would be acceptable.
And that's all of the questions that have come in so far.
All right, well, we'll still have, I guess, a minute or two. We're not coming right up to our 2 hours. And as people maybe are thinking of other questions, I'll have the contact slide up right now if you want any of my contact information or anyone else's contact information. There is still plenty of time for people to get into the grants management system, to start coming up with specifics on a program, or I'm sorry, a project that they would want to implement. So we just recommend starting as soon as possible, not waiting till the last minute for any aspect of your project. And just want you to know that we try to be as knowledgeable as possible and as accessible as possible. So if you have any questions, prefer to give a phone call rather than send something in an email, or to do your own homework on our web pages. I personally am available to answer any sort of question you would have for your multi-unit dwellings project.
Stephen, I have a question from Audrey
Okay.
asking, are rural areas more likely to receive funds? What goes into the decision if they are approved or not?
Okay, so the first question about rural, in our mitigation plan, there is a requirement for a urban and rural split of funds. I believe that is 67%, up to 67% can be for urban, suburban, and no less than 33% for rural. So it's not an upfront requirement of a project, but it is something as we start distributing funds that we're monitoring to make sure that we are providing the minimum and no more than the maximum to either of those two categories. From phase one, it just happened to kind of work out that the ratio of people that applied for rural versus the ratio that applied for urban and suburban more or less met that requirement. Well, definitely, they didn't meet that requirement on its own. We didn't need to reject anyone because the maximum amount of funding for urban projects had already been reached. We didn't get in a position where we hadn't met the minimum for the rural projects. So that's just a long way of saying that there is a requirement in our mitigation plan. That's something that we're monitoring on our end, and that split shouldn't keep anyone from applying. But again, first come, first serve. If you want to increase the chance that we still have funds for either of those two categories, definitely apply sooner rather than later. And then kind of a more general answer about how applications are selected. This first come, first serve format, we treat that as kind of a pass-fail. So other programs, including the other electric vehicle related program for the DC Fast and other of the diesel programs under Volkswagen, have scored applications. And for these first come, first serve programs, you won't receive a score, but you will be evaluated on whether all of the required information is found, whether all of the required documentation is attached, and whether your project as submitted is eligible based on the rules and based on the information found in the RFP. And after the review, if everything checks out and we still have money to distribute, your project will be awarded. And it's up to you whether or not to accept that award or not. If for any reason that we have run out of total project funding, or again, talking about the rural versus urban split, if we've kind of met the maximum or we're trying to meet the minimum, and we can't award projects based on that requirement, that could be another factor. But in general, it's a pass-fail. Does your application complete, and does it meet the RFP requirements? And if you can answer yes to both of those questions and we have funding available, the more than likely, especially if you apply sooner rather than later, your project will receive an award.
Thanks, Stephen. No other questions have come through.
Okay, well, we're approaching 2:30. I think I wouldn't get anyone complaining that they get half an hour of their day back. And just want to say I really appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I hope you found this webinar worthwhile. I also want to thank everyone on the Volkswagen team for their help on the presentations and just getting the webinar off the ground and with the Q&A. Thanks again for your time. We look forward to working with you, and please have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Stephen.